Welcome back to the Emma International Podcast, where we explore the regulatory, quality, and compliance issues shaping the life sciences industry. I'm Eric.
And I'm Sarah. Today, we're discussing a topic that is quickly moving from experimentation to real world implementation: the future of artificial intelligence validation in life sciences.
AI is already being used across drug development, medical devices, manufacturing, clinical research, pharmacovigilance, and quality operations. As these tools become more involved in regulated activities, companies face an important question. How do you demonstrate that an AI system is reliable, controlled, and fit for its intended use?
That question is especially challenging because traditional validation methods were designed for systems that operate according to predictable, predefined rules. AI models may generate probabilistic outputs, depend heavily on data, and, in some cases, change over time.
Today, we'll look at how AI validation differs from traditional computer system validation, what regulators are emphasizing, and what companies can do now to prepare for the future.
Let's start with the basics. When we talk about validating AI, what are companies actually trying to prove?
At its core, validation provides documented evidence that a system consistently performs as intended within a defined context of use. For AI, that means more than confirming that the software functions technically. Companies must also demonstrate that the model's data, outputs, performance, limitations, and risks are understood and appropriately controlled.
And context of use is critical. An AI tool that helps employees organize internal documents does not carry the same level of risk as a model used to support clinical decisions, identify adverse events, approve manufacturing deviations, or generate information for a regulatory submission.
Correct. Validation should be proportional to the potential impact on patient safety, product quality, data integrity, and regulatory decision making. The higher the risk, the stronger the evidence and controls need to be.
Traditional computerized systems usually operate through defined inputs, programmed rules, and expected outputs. You can test whether the system followed the specified process and produced the correct result.
AI systems can be less predictable. Their performance depends on factors such as training data, model architecture, user prompts, operating conditions, and how the output is interpreted. A model may perform well overall, but struggle with certain populations, uncommon situations, new data, or conditions that were not adequately represented during development.
That means companies cannot simply validate the surrounding software platform and assume the AI model is also validated.
Right? They need to assess the entire AI lifecycle. That begins with clearly defining the system's intended use and understanding the quality and relevance of the data supporting it.
Companies also need to evaluate how the model was developed and tested, which performance metrics will be monitored, and what acceptance criteria must be met before the system is approved for use.
They must assess whether the model could produce biased results, determine how much human oversight is required, and establish controls for future changes.
And the work continues after implementation. Organizations need ongoing performance monitoring, strong data integrity and cybersecurity controls, and a process for managing third party vendors and externally developed models.
That is why AI validation is no longer a one-time event completed before deployment. It becomes an ongoing process that continues for as long as the AI system remains in use.
What direction are regulators taking when it comes to AI?
Regulators are increasingly applying a risk-based and life-cycle-focused approach. FDA's January 2025 draft guidance for AI used to support regulatory decision-making for drugs and biological products introduced a credibility assessment framework built around the model's specific context of use.
In other words, companies need to define what the model is being used for, how important its output is to the decision, and what could happen if the model provides an incorrect or misleading result.
FDA has also emphasized lifecycle management for AI-enabled medical device software. The broader direction is clear. Companies should be able to explain how an AI system was developed, how its performance was evaluated, what controls are in place, and how changes will be managed after deployment.
The European Medicines Agency has expressed similar expectations across the medicinal product lifecycle, emphasizing data governance, transparency, technical performance, risk management, and appropriate human involvement.
Companies operating internationally should also consider how broader AI regulations may overlap with existing GXP, privacy, cybersecurity, and medical device requirements. The goal should not be to build a separate compliance program for every jurisdiction. Organizations need an integrated AI governance framework that can support multiple regulatory expectations.
One of the biggest challenges in AI validation is data. A model can only be as reliable as the data used to train, test, and operate it.
Companies need to understand where the data came from and whether it was collected legally and ethically. They must determine if the data is complete, accurate, relevant, and representative of the population or environment in which the system will operate.
They also need to look for errors, missing information, inconsistencies, and historical biases that could influence the model's output.
Data lineage is another major consideration. Organizations need traceability showing where the data originated, how it was processed, what transformations were performed, and which version was used during training and testing.
That traceability supports both validation and data integrity. If a model's performance later declines or produces unexpected results, the organization needs enough information to investigate the cause.
It also means that data governance cannot be treated as an IT responsibility alone. Quality, regulatory, clinical, technical, privacy, cybersecurity, and business teams may all need to participate.
Another concern is model bias. If training data does not adequately represent the population or conditions in which the model will be used, its performance may vary significantly across different groups.
That is why companies should not rely only on a single overall accuracy score. They may need to evaluate performance across relevant patient populations, clinical sites, products, equipment types, or operating conditions.
Explainability is also important, but the required level will depend on the system's intended use and risk.
For some lower risk applications, it may be enough to document the model's purpose, limitations, inputs, outputs, and appropriate use. For higher risk applications, organizations may need stronger evidence explaining how the model reached a result and how users should evaluate that result.
Transparency also applies to the user. Employees need to know when they are interacting with AI, what the tool is approved to do, and when human review is required.
A well-validated AI system can still create compliance problems if users misunderstand its capabilities or rely on its outputs without appropriate review.
The phrase human in the loop comes up frequently in conversations about AI, but simply having a person review an output does not automatically create an effective control.
The reviewer must have the right qualifications, enough information to evaluate the output, and the authority to reject or override it. The review also needs to be meaningful and documented when required.
If employees routinely approve AI-generated recommendations without questioning them, human oversight becomes a checkbox rather than a true risk control. This is sometimes referred to as automation bias.
Companies should clearly define which decisions AI can support, which decisions require human approval, and which activities should never be delegated to an AI system.
Training should also help users recognize uncertain, incomplete, or potentially fabricated outputs.
Generative AI introduces another layer of complexity because the same prompt may produce different responses. These tools can also generate content that sounds credible, but is incomplete, inaccurate, or unsupported.
That makes traditional pass or fail testing difficult. Companies may need to develop representative test scenarios and standardized prompt libraries. They may also need to establish performance thresholds, conduct repeated testing, and involve qualified subject matter experts in the review process.
Organizations should also control what information users are permitted to enter into public or externally hosted tools. Confidential information, patient data, intellectual property, and regulated records can create significant privacy and security risks if handled improperly.
For regulated applications, companies should clearly define approved use cases and restrict access based on an employee's responsibilities. They should also consider whether prompts and outputs need to be retained, how sources will be verified, when human review is required, and whether the platform provides an adequate audit trail.
Procedures should also explain how employees can report unexpected behavior, inaccurate outputs, security concerns, or potential data integrity issues.
And there is one important reminder. Using AI to draft a document does not transfer accountability to the tool. The company remains responsible for the accuracy, completeness, and compliance of the final content.
Let's talk about what happens after an AI system is validated and released. How can companies make sure it continues to perform appropriately?
They need a monitoring plan. AI performance can change as new data, user behavior, products, processes, or operating conditions are introduced. This is often referred to as model drift or data drift.
Monitoring should focus on metrics that matter for the intended use. Depending on the application, companies may need to track accuracy, false positive rates, false negative rates, error trends, user overrides, complaints, deviations, or performance across different groups.
They should also define acceptable performance limits and determine what happens when the model moves outside those limits.
Depending on the risk, the response might include opening an investigation, conducting additional testing, retraining the model, restricting its use, or temporarily removing it from service.
Version control is also essential. Organizations need to know which model version was used, what data supported it, what changes were made, and whether those changes require partial or full revalidation.
This becomes especially important when companies rely on third-party or cloud-based AI models that may be updated by the vendor.
Contracts and quality agreements should address how the vendor will notify the company about changes. They should also clarify access to validation evidence, security responsibilities, incident reporting, and ongoing performance monitoring.
For companies beginning this process, where should they start?
The first step is creating an inventory of AI systems currently in use. Many organizations may already have AI embedded in software platforms without realizing it.
For each system, the company should identify the owner, vendor, intended use, data involved, affected processes, and potential impact on patients, products, and regulatory obligations.
The next step is risk classification. Not every AI tool requires the same level of validation.
Companies can classify systems based on the intended use, the importance of the decisions they support, their level of autonomy, the sensitivity of the data they process, and the consequences of an incorrect output.
Once the system's risk is understood, the company can establish appropriate validation requirements. The intended use should be clearly documented, and roles and responsibilities should be assigned from the beginning.
The organization should then assess data quality and lineage, complete a formal risk assessment, and define performance requirements and acceptance criteria.
Testing should use representative data and realistic scenarios. The validation team should also evaluate possible biases, known limitations, human oversight controls, and the system's privacy and cybersecurity risks.
Finally, the framework should include change control, version management, ongoing monitoring, periodic review, and clear criteria for revalidation.
Documentation should be created throughout the lifecycle, not assembled at the end. If an inspector asks why a particular model was considered suitable, the company should be able to provide a clear evidence-based explanation.
One common mistake is adopting an AI tool before defining the problem it is supposed to solve.
Another is validating the technology without validating the use case. A model may perform well in a demonstration, but fail when exposed to real users, real workflows, and real-world data.
Companies may also rely too heavily on vendor claims. A vendor's testing can support the validation process, but the regulated company still needs to determine whether the system is suitable for its own intended use and environment.
We also see gaps when organizations have weak data governance, unclear accountability, insufficient user training, limited change control, or no plan for ongoing monitoring.
Perhaps the biggest mistake is waiting for every regulatory expectation to become final before building an AI governance program. The technology is already being used. Companies need reasonable controls now, even as the regulatory landscape continues to evolve.
Looking ahead, AI validation will likely become more continuous, automated, and integrated into quality systems.
We may see organizations use automated monitoring dashboards, predefined model performance triggers, stronger data lineage tools, and more structured documentation across the AI lifecycle.
We can also expect greater collaboration among quality, regulatory affairs, IT, data science, cybersecurity, legal, privacy, and business teams. AI cannot be governed effectively within a single department.
Regulators are unlikely to expect perfection or zero risk. They will expect companies to understand their systems, identify meaningful risks, establish appropriate controls, monitor performance, and respond when problems occur.
The companies that prepare now will be better positioned to adopt AI responsibly while maintaining patient safety, product quality, and regulatory confidence.
The future of AI validation in life sciences is not about applying old validation templates to new technology. It requires a lifecycle-based approach that accounts for data, model performance, human oversight, change, and ongoing risk.
Companies should begin by understanding where AI is already being used in their organizations. From there, they can define approved use cases, assign accountability, assess risk, and develop validation requirements that reflect the impact of each system.
AI has the potential to improve efficiency, accelerate innovation, and strengthen decision-making across life sciences. But those benefits depend on whether companies can demonstrate that the technology is trustworthy and appropriately controlled.
Emma International helps life sciences organizations develop risk based AI governance, validation, data integrity, and regulatory compliance strategies. If your organization is implementing AI or evaluating an AI enabled system, our team can help you build a framework that supports innovation while protecting patients and maintaining compliance.
Visit minternational.com to learn more or speak with one of our experts.
Thank you for listening to the Emma International podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you do not miss our next episode.
Until next time, stay informed, stay prepared, and stay compliant.